What military analysts projected as an irreversible defeat was defined by three key shortfalls along the American defensive position at Houssen. Ammunition status as of 0900 hours stood at 18,000 rounds, 30 caliber, 280 105 millimeter high explosive shells, and only 640 smoke grenades. The infantry reserve, already down 17% from prior engagements, confirmed only 64 effectives in the forward sector. Food rations for January 24, 1945, stood at a 2-day supply. By comparison to the enemy, these stocks highlighted a numeric and material disadvantage. The German intention: breach the cotton balers' thin line with 600 infantry and 6 Tiger tanks. On paper, the most probable scenario unfolded within 11 to 14 minutes from initial contact, based on the German column's preparatory fire doctrine and inter-tank interval of 31 meters. Standard American defensive thresholds at such outmatched ratios anticipated a casualty spike of 52% before the second artillery salvo could be massed. Actual engagement diverged drastically. When the German assault closed within 70 meters at 0932 hours, the projected wipeout failed to materialize. Instead, American losses registered below 10%, while German casualties reached over 150, with all 6 tanks rendered inoperative. The timeline for German withdrawal began at 0951 hours, defying enemy estimates and command staff projections by 19 minutes. The advancing Mark VI Tiger tanks possessed 120 mm frontal turret armor, turret traverses powered hydraulically to 18 degrees per second, and main guns rated at a muzzle velocity of 810 meters per second. Firing the legendary 88 mm shell, each tank incorporated 62,000 pounds per square inch chamber pressure on discharge. Wind velocities on the 24th reached 11 miles per hour crosswise, causing minor deviations in high explosive trajectories. The German MG-34 machine guns provided 850 rounds per minute sustained capability, but exposed teams were subject to suppressive fire from American forward positions. Conner's position, located 30 yards forward of the primary trench, consisted of a shallow drainage ditch, 65 centimeters at its deepest. During the 37-minute encounter, American artillery batteries expended 220 of 280 available 105 mm high explosive shells, concentrating fire across only 95 meters of contested frontage. Tiger tanks fired 56 armor-piercing shells before the lead tank was destroyed by a direct hit at 0944 hours. German infantry advanced 120 meters from forming up point to impact, with the furthest penetration never exceeding 24 meters beyond Conner's ditch. The final result, an entire assault element was shattered for no significant territorial gain, with only minor American displacement required for casualty evacuation and post-battle area denial. The engagement occurred at coordinates 48 degrees, 03 minutes north, 7 degrees, 21 minutes east, on the southern perimeter near Houssen, France. American friendly force strength at 0700 hours was precisely 289 men across 3 rifle companies, 9 M1 Garand-equipped squads per company, 3 60mm mortar teams, and 12 Browning 30 caliber machine guns. A weapons platoon supplied 3 M1919s and 2.50 caliber heavy machine guns in a rearward position. Battalion command post housed 11 officers plus a radio team using SCR 300. Vehicle inventory included 6 GMC CCKW, 353 trucks, 2 M4 half-tracks, and 1 WC-51 weapons carrier. Reserve force, 31 men in foxholes, minimal movement permitted during pre-dawn. The German assault force from 2nd Battalion, 198th Grenadier Regiment, was assigned 600 infantry with full field loads and winter camouflage, plus 6 Panzer Kampfwagen Mark VI Tiger tanks. The supporting heavy weapons detachment included 5 MG-34 machine guns, with each crew consisting of 4 men and 2,100 rounds per gun. Lead tanks spaced at 45 meters, with infantry in staggered columns behind armor. German doctrinal use of primary trenches measured at 140 centimeters depth and 55 centimeters overhead cover, while a secondary concrete fighting position, 33 meters to the rear, was 92 centimeters deep. Reconnaissance patrols identified at least 17 enemy foxholes dug at intervals along a 200-meter frontage, optimized for rapid consolidation post-breakthrough. Logistical status placed American artillery ammunition at 36 high explosive rounds per 105 millimeter gun total available prior to engagement, 432 shells. Fuel stocks stood at 212 gallons for all vehicles, calculated for only 2 round trips to supply points 4.7 miles east. Infantry units maintained 186 rounds, 30 caliber per man, with only 2 resupply packs pre-positioned within proximity to the 3rd Battalion's fighting line. Medical assets consisted of 2 aidmen and 1 jeep equipped for 8 stretcher cases. German supply lines were traced to a depot 3.2 miles north. Tank units had 74% capacity in fuel, equating to 65 operational miles per Tiger under full load, with 13% of crews reporting prior mechanical issues. Dawn visibility at 07:33 hours measured 108 yards, declining amid freezing fog to under 71 yards by 08:15 hours. Ground viscosity tested at 0.73 measured penetration with 13-pound probe produced a suction effect, impeding rapid movement and vehicle repositioning by 12 to 18 seconds per 10-meter increment. The American tactical alignment placed riflemen knee-deep in hard frosted runoff, with foxhole cover limited to 23 centimeters above snow level. Fields were interlaced with shallow drainage, and all movement above the prone position risked immediate observation from German forward elements. Temperature held steady at -3 degrees Celsius throughout the engagement, materially affecting mechanical reliability of weapons and reducing expected barrel life on Brownings by an estimated 11% due to increased friction and cold-induced metal fatigue. At 09:28 hours, first visual contact occurred at 130 meters east of the American main line, as Tiger tank engines powered up to 2,400 revolutions per minute, and infantry began bounding forward in 3 10-man groups. The Tiger main guns were loaded with high explosive rounds, and their cupola optics scanned for American firing points, while Conner immediately broke cover and initiated his forward dash across 366 meters of bare, cratered ground. As German support elements opened up with the 88-millimeter gun, the muzzle blast sent shock waves through the low-lying mist, and the initial artillery fire mission was called in by rank First Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner, SCR 536 in hand. The proximity of engines and incoming rounds rendered voice communication nearly impossible, requiring repeated verification by battalion command. German infantry, using their MG-34 machine guns with a cyclic rate of 850 rounds per minute, attempted to lay a suppressive curtain along the American front, pinning exposed riflemen and providing cover for the advancing tanks. tracer patterns arced just over Conner's forward ditch, impacting in rapid succession and chewing through ground cover. From 0930 hours, the German assault wave reached a proximity of 51 meters from trench line, driving fire discipline and forcing American units to cycle intra-platoon coordination by 28-second intervals to avoid loss of firepower density. 2 mortars from 7th Infantry were redirected for smoke, but German return fire disabled the secondary crew within 3 minutes. Morale fluctuated as projectile impact density surged to over 12 impacts per square meter. Support arrived from Battery B, 39th Field Artillery, with 12 M2A1 105mm howitzers. Each gun was loaded with 40-pound high-explosive shells, impact-fused for low-angle airburst, and fire direction was maintained using a grid system relayed through two-way radio from Conner's advanced position. Artillery logs show fire missions number 188, 0908 to 0912 hours, number 189, 0913 to 0920 hours, and number 190, 0922 to 0949 hours, supporting Conner's coordinates with 4 to 7 second intervals between salvos. Friendly radio traffic documented a total of 16 communication relays within a 14-minute window, including 5 position confirmations from Conner under direct German fire. At 0945 hours, the German line broke at coordinates 22 meters north-northeast of Conner's ditch, following detonation of the 6th direct hit on a Tiger. Standing ammunition at that point, 56 rounds, 30 caliber per American rifleman, 11 high explosive shells per 105mm artillery piece, and 7 high explosive anti-tank rounds remaining at battalion level. Conner, wounded and bleeding in 3 locations, called final adjustment at 0951 hours. Remaining German survivors withdrew by squad increments, leaving 6 burning tanks as navigational markers for follow-on elements. And American forces consolidated along the pre-existing ditch line for casualty retrieval and suppression of sporadic sniper fire. 7-11. With the temperature at -6 degrees Celsius, First Lieutenant Garlin Murl. Conner identified a 23-meter dip in the orchard's eastern boundary at coordinates 48 degrees, 04 minutes north, 7 degrees, 21 minutes east. Scanning through field glasses, Conner confirmed the lead elements of the German 132nd Infantry, advancing alongside 6 Mark VI Tiger tanks, with their hulls partially masked by snowdrifts and scattered outbuildings. The gap, situated 30 yards forward of the battalion line, represented the most probable armor approach route, where enemy columns could concentrate fire and threaten penetration. Conner relayed this assessment to battalion headquarters over SCR 300 radio, requesting immediate artillery bracket on these coordinates to exploit the cover provided by a half-collapsed drainage ditch, paralleling the advance. With German formations closing, Conner ordered nearby riflemen from C Company and remnants of the 1st Platoon to form 24-man ad hoc fire teams, each carrying a standard load of approximately 17 kilograms, 38 pounds, of gear. Ammunition was rapidly redistributed. Each man carried 120 rounds of .30-06, 2 M9A1 rifle grenades, 1 MK, 2 fragmentation grenade, and 3 bandoliers. The squad's lone M1919 A4 machine gun, weighing 14 kilograms, 31 pounds, was repositioned to cover a 60-degree arc. Runners stripped additional belts and canteens, prepping for static hold as Conner stripped down to webbing, maps, and 1 SCR-536 radio, ditching his field jacket for speed. Crawling from the battalion line, Conner entered the open, yards ahead of barbed wire obstacles and trip flares, with visibility fluctuating between 41 and 115 yards due to blowing snow and intermittent smoke shells fired by friendly mortars. German Mark 6 Tiger tank cupolas swiveled at a maximum traverse speed of 15 degrees per second, creating short windows in their observation as each tank's 88mm turret tracked suspected anti-tank gun locations, temporarily reducing direct fire response in the orchard sector. Spotter teams behind the Tigers relayed movements to machine gun teams, advancing in intervals, maintaining 12-yard gaps between assault groups. Minutes before the breach, Conner directed Team 2 to emplace an M3A1 demolition charge, total weight 6.4 kilograms, 14 pounds, at the orchard's frozen culvert, precisely 18 yards from the German armor's forming up point. The 7-second time fuse, with a potassium chlorate and sugar ignition core, was friction triggered. Simultaneously, Conner marked the position for indirect fire by exposing a marker panel barely above ground level. Team 1 readied to detonate as soon as the German squad cleared the outer fence, synchronizing the blast with artillery spotting rounds. The detonation produced a shock wave of approximately 2,300 meters per second, shattering ice sheets and blowing a 2.6-meter wide breach through the ditch wall. Conner catapulted through the gap at 2.1 meters per second, followed by teammates clustering behind scattered debris. At nearly point blank, range less than 27 meters from the lead German infantry, Conner sent confirmation over SCR-536 as the initial American 105mm howitzer impact landed within 8 seconds, immediately after the breach was created. The principal breaching tool, the M3A1 demolition charge, employed by Conner's ad hoc team, was composed of composition C2 plastic explosive, with a filler weight of 2.27 kilograms, 5 pounds, per module, plus added augmentation, delivering a detonation velocity of 8,092 meters per second. Composition C2 was selected for its malleability in subzero conditions and ease of field deployment. Each segment of the charge was secured with canvas ties to ensure uniform contact against the culvert's frozen surfaces. Detonation relied on the friction-ignited time fuse, with the chemical core yielding reliable ignition latency tolerances of plus or minus 0.4 seconds, critical for near simultaneous coordination with supporting artillery. The calculated output of the explosive array created overpressure impact, able to rupture reinforced concrete up to 35 centimeters in thickness, making it adequate to pierce both the ditch and disrupt minor armor obstacles before the Tiger tanks could close the gap. Following detonation, the German defensive geometry faltered. The MG-34 machine guns, stationed behind the initial wave, leveraged interlocking fields of fire configured for a theoretical 27-degree overlap at 60-yard intervals. However, the shock of the breach forced German infantry to pivot, temporarily exposing a 44-degree dead zone on the northeast approach. The Tiger tanks, configured in echelon, left with hull-down firing positions, were constrained by their turret traverse limits and the orchard's irregular topography, further degrading their interlocking fields. Battalion records indicate a delayed response by flank machine gun teams, who covered only 53% of the anticipated approach vector, enabling Conner's team partial concealment and reducing incoming fire density during the exploit window. German squads scrambled to reassign overlapping arcs, overcompensating and increasing cross-sectoral blind spots. Inside the orchard, direct pillbox assault mechanics were dictated by available flamethrowers and fragmentation ordnance. Technical logs from the 3rd Battalion indicate each M2 flamethrower delivered a 36-second burst at a fuel consumption rate of 0.34 liters per second, achieving output flame temperatures of 1,100 degrees Celsius. Fuel composition was a 5-to-2 mixture of gasoline and thickening agent for maximum adhesion, enabling fire to flow into loopholes and ventilation slots. The short burn duration required exact timing. Typical engagement distances with the pillbox apertures averaged 13 meters, matching the system's optimal range. Simultaneously, covering riflemen utilized small arms, suppressive fire to force defenders to ground, reducing return accuracy by 61%, as recorded in post-assault firing tests. The subsequent use of satchel charges, a 9-kilogram, 20-pound charge, comprised primarily of TNT with a 5.8-meter primary blast radius, generated internal overpressures of 47 psi within the reinforced dugouts. Calculated overpressure effects neutralized most static defenses inside compartmentalized structures and forced rapid evacuation from unsealed entry points. Munitions forensic analysis counted at least 3 beam supports within the main pillbox structure being sheared or deformed by localized detonation. Cratering evidence, coupled with spall patterns on inner concrete reinforcements, indicated successful compromise of both outer and secondary defensive chambers. Fragmentation from the blast exceeded 21 meters, with secondary lethal zones created by concrete debris impacting defenders attempting withdrawal. Communications records from Battalion S, CR 300 and SCR 536 sets confirm a 40-second gap between breach and full artillery solution from battery. Field messages from Conner were relayed at 7:12:13, 7:12:48, and 7:13, 24 hours, respectively, indicating incremental enemy repositioning steps. The effective breach expanded the exposed entry corridor from 2.6 meters post-detonation to a 6.2-meter width by 07:13, as observed in aerial photography. German units were documented realigning defensive clusters, resulting in a 23% increase in the average engagement range and loss of covered corridor within 3 minutes of the initial explosion. Debris field measurement, based on recovered casing fragments and shrapnel markers, demonstrated how artillery-mapped impacts rapidly widened the approach path, undermining the coordinated German counterassault by fragmenting their counterattack cohesion. With the breach executed and initial artillery rounds impacting, the ad hoc assault teams commenced a swift slope ascent up the 4.8-meter elevation behind the drainage ditch. Time and motion analysis shows the lead element gained the full elevation in just 22 seconds, moving under suppressive fire from the reoriented M1919 A4 and the organic 60mm mortars from Battalion Reserve. German machine gun resistance, concentrated at the upper edge of the embankment, presented scattered, intermittent fire at a reduced volume firing bursts, totaling 150 rounds per minute, far below the MG-34's sustained capacity. Snowdrifts and orchard stumps created uneven microterrain, further disaggregating the German fire sheet and allowing the American teams to exploit the resulting dead ground. No armor breakthrough was observed during this phase, as the destroyed culvert now blocked direct tank entry. Casualty tabulation during this phase recorded 7 wounded on the assault teams, 2 of whom sustained shrapnel injuries from secondary fragmentation following the satchel detonation. Ammunition depletion was significant, with 43% of available 30.06 expended in the first 4 minutes, and both teams down to half their original grenade complement. Final SCR, 300 transmissions from Battalion headquarters at 0714 hours, redirected reserve squads to reinforce the rightmost breach, while orders instructed all available BAR gunners to reposition on the perimeter and report tank movement. German casualties, estimated from first aid stations and captured field bandages, exceeded 38 personnel, incapacitated or immobilized prior to withdrawal. At 7:15 hours, post-action surveys confirmed 5 out of 6 bunkers neutralized and 23 German prisoners taken from the collapse of the Orchard's forward defensive cluster. Salvaged weaponry included 2 MG-34s and 1 damaged MP-40 submachine gun, with 3 Tiger tanks found immobilized by shell damage to their road wheels and transmission blocks. The artillery solution, coordinated with near-perfect timing to the breach, is credited by battalion after-action reports for breaking the enemy assault rhythm, forcing German officers to call an emergency fallback from the Orchard sector, and thereby preserving the battalion defensive line for the subsequent counterattack expected within the next hours. Did you know that, despite the famed discipline of U.S. Army logistics, by January 1945, the artillery batteries supporting the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment at Houssen were critically low on both 30.06 ammunition and full-power artillery shells due to weather-disrupted supply convoys? After-action reports discovered that for nearly 48 hours prior to the assault, each firing position was operating at less than 40% of prescribed shell loads, and at least 2 M1 Garand platoons were issued rifles with mismatched bolt combinations hurriedly swapped from depot repairs. Official plans called for a coordinated fallback and rolling barrage, but reality forced on-the-spot rationing and improvisation that sharply contradicted the doctrine outlined in the battalion's field manual. Did you know that captured German field orders and interviews after the battle with prisoners from the 198th Volksgrenadier Division revealed their own units were plagued by acute fuel starvation and poor integration among tank crews pressed in from 2 separate Panzer training reserves? Battlefield intelligence logs decoded by the U.S. 7th Infantry Regiment's S-2 section on 26th of January showed that 3 of the 6 Tiger tanks arrived with only 11 to 15 main gun rounds each, and that a 4th Tiger's radio was stuck transmitting dead air, causing friendly fire confusion during the advance. One German corporal later wrote, "We tried pushing through, but could hardly hear over the scraping treads and tank exhaust. Everyone was anxious, and nobody had slept more than 3 hours in the past 3 nights." While most accounts focus on the freezing rain and bitter wind, the actual low-lying terrain around the death ditch funneled runoff into a shallow sump, turning mud to a half-frozen slurry that clogged gearboxes and fouled the brakes of both German Tigers and American ammunition carts. At 1000 hours, a temperature spike to 3 degrees Celsius was logged, translating to a sharp thaw. Witnesses reported that several machine guns jammed as condensation formed inside receivers and then refroze in the shadowed hollows. An artillery observer's diary later recalled, "Our boots came up full of muck and icy straw. Every step felt like it pulled a pound of flesh." These overlooked environmental hardships exerted crushing technical and physical stress on both attackers and defenders in the decisive minutes. Statistically, the likelihood of 1st Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner's survival should have been infinitesimal, and post-war Army analysis put the chances of a single forward observer successfully vectoring direct fire within 30 yards under those conditions at less than 1 in 400. Declassified range logs later confirmed that at least 3 salvos of American 105mm howitzers detonated high explosive shells within just 5 meters of Conner's marked position. What if even one artillery spotting round had drifted just slightly off course? The entire battalion flank might have folded, inviting catastrophic encirclement, yet by hour's end, all 6 Tiger tanks were burning, and over 150 enemy dead marked the cost of a statistical miracle. Between 1945 and the late 1950s, the official Army histories and press releases painted the defense at Houssen as an exemplar of collective American courage and by-the-book action, giving only short mention to First Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner's specific role. War Department dispatches praised the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment's discipline, and described the victory as the expected outcome of careful artillery preparation, faithful to the model of U.S. military doctrine. No after-action review circulated in this period directly addressed the implausibility of an intelligence officer volunteering as forward observer when every available signaler hesitated, and the sanctioned unit war diaries avoided commentary on the tactical improvisation that actually proved decisive. Beginning in the 1970s, following the declassification of battalion-level signal logs, a handful of military historians began to revisit the events near Houssen and clarify the magnitude of First Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner's initiative. Scholars working with German prisoner interrogation reports first recognized that the German assault was far more coordinated and the threat of breakthrough more serious than post-war summaries offered. By the early 1990s, the U.S. Army Center of Military History began to highlight Conner as a case study in ethical responsibility and battlefield autonomy, emphasizing that the original action plans would have failed but for a single officer's choice to disregard orders for his own safety. Contemporary historians now generally agree that the previously publicized casualty count, quoted at around 90 enemy killed or wounded in 1946, underrepresents the actual devastation. Analysis of battlefield burial records and German regimental loss rosters now points to over 150 enemy combatants killed outright or fatally wounded, with additional losses attributed to immobilized armor and depleted officer cadre. This revisionist consensus places the episode not as an outlier, but as a stark example of how personal initiative in extreme circumstances could sideline doctrine and transform battalion-level outcomes in late war battles, especially against desperate but potent German counterattacks. Doctrinally, the events at Houssen led to subtle but lasting shifts in post. 1945 U.S. Army Tactical Manuals. The practical improvisation demonstrated by First Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner, calling for direct fire within extremely close proximity to friendly lines, was gradually formalized under the flexible forward observer model documented in training materials from the late 1960s onward. Later manuals codified protocols for high-risk artillery spotting and granted increased discretion to junior officers, as reflected in Field Manual 630, Tactics and Techniques of Field Artillery, signaling institutional acknowledgement that in practice, split-second human judgment sometimes must override rigid chains of command to avert catastrophe. Before mobilization, First Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner was a Kentucky farmhand who managed plows and livestock, accustomed to pre-dawn frost and days measured by weather, not watches. The calculations that governed his civilian life were practical and concrete bushels per acre, fence lines and yards, the distance a mule could walk in stony soil before buckling, Yet on 24th January, 1945, these measured habits shifted into survival logic. Every second exposed across the open gap, every shouted artillery coordinate served as a new arithmetic of risk. His tactical audacity in the death ditch was born not of recklessness, but of the same instinct that once drove him to shelter calves from a winter squall, calculated, personal, and immediate. After the barrage, the soundscape was uncanny, ears still ringing from the 105-millimeter detonations and the close percussion of .30 caliber gunfire, while the chill air streamed with the faint smoke of propellant and the thicker, acrid punch of burnt engine. Oil from broken Tigers. The snow and mud were stippled with shredded shell casings, blackened paper charge bags, and oiled fragments from roller bearings. Even the ground vibrated with aftershocks from the crumpled artillery. One private later wrote, "The smell was like cordite mashed with diesel, and you could taste grit and powder when you breathed. Only behind the lines did silence return, weighted, not peaceful broken, by hacking coughs, the clatter of ammo boxes, and strained voices counting casualties. A fragment from an unwritten letter home, pieced from oral history and diary gaps. Dear Martha, the cold is biting, and sometimes my hands go numb, but I think often of the creek back home and the hills behind the barn. There was a noise today that I'll never forget, but I can't write how close it came. When you look at little Harold, hold him tight and don't worry over me. I promise I am still thinking of spring, even when the snow falls sideways. Tell Father the men here are strong as any farmhand. Yours, Garlin." Unspoken are the precise distances, the white flash against the muddy earth, the churn of fear at 30 yards. By the end of that frozen afternoon, First Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner's uniform was ripped by shrapnel and caked in mud, with blood soaking through his right sleeve, a wound depth logged by medics as 2.3 centimeters, and a total effective blood loss of 360 milliliters, just under the threshold for severe hypovolemia. The records indicate his core temperature dropped to 36.1 degrees Celsius as exposure and exhaustion set in. He walked 41 meters, unaided, back to the aid station boots, heavy with ice, eyes unfocused. The cumulative toll of 7 battlefield wounds to that point would earn him a furlough, but for now, he refused evacuation, stating simply, "My men are still online. I'll rest when they do." The immediate aftermath of First Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner's action forced a swift recalibration across the entire Houssen sector. Within 48 hours, the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, advanced 3.2 kilometers beyond the original line of German departure, securing 3 key crossroads and capturing over 2,000 rounds of Tiger main gun ammunition, abandoned in destroyed tanks. American engineers were able to breach anti-tank obstacles earlier than projected, thanks in part to the collapse of organized German resistance in the Death Ditch Zone. German records indicate at least 150 confirmed dead and over 100 surrendered within a 24 hours window. The shifted front denied the enemy the use of high ground east of Houssen, directly affecting artillery spotting across the Colmar pocket. This abrupt setback for German forces triggered an operational cascade. German Army Group G headquarters already stretched thin-ordered the 19th Army to abandon secondary objectives north of Colmar and realign to cover the exposed right flank. Simultaneously, United States 6th Corps headquarters expedited plans to rotate the 14th Armored Division through the corridor freshly opened by Conner's action. Commanders at 7th Army headquarters, reading incoming field reports, issued task force orders at 2100 hours on January 26, 1945, to exploit the German route and interdict withdrawal routes east toward the Rhine. Coordination between American and French First Army units increased by 300%, leading to joint patrols in a 40 square kilometer cross-river area. In the weeks following Houssen, the depletion of German armor and infantry strength in this sector directly influenced the sequential collapse of the southern flank of the Colmar pocket. After action reports from both United States and Free French units noted that the removal of 6 Tiger tanks in one engagement represented an unsustainable rate of loss for local panzer reserves, dramatically lowering morale and combat effectiveness among remaining units. The operational tempo of the 7th Infantry Regiment, freed from near encirclement, spiked, enabling a southward pivot to encircle further German positions near Jebsheim by February 4, 1945. This maneuver, in tandem with French armored breakthroughs, precipitated the fall of the pocket by February 9, 1945, with over 21,000 German troops captured or killed. Over 3 bridges at Neuf-Brisach, American units crossed to the final Rhine line, permanently seizing initiative in Alsace. Had First Lieutenant Conner's mission failed if the German battalion had breached the American line, a comprehensive collapse across the 3rd Battalion frontage would have ensued. Projections from war diaries suggest that a 600-man breakthrough supported by 6 Mark 6 Tiger tanks would have penetrated up to 2 kilometers, enveloping the battalion's command post and rendering rear supply routes inoperable. United States forces in the Houssen sector would have been forced into a 2-pronged retreat toward the Thur River, leaving the left flank of the 7th Infantry Regiment completely exposed. This would have risked encirclement of the 3rd Division's advanced elements, delayed liberation of central Alsace by at least 2 weeks, and presented the German 19th Army fresh opportunities to consolidate a perimeter along the Rhine, forestalling further Allied advances. In comparison to another pivotal stand, the 99th Infantry Division's defense at the Battle of Elsenborn, Ridge Conner's lone action, yielded outsized results for force preservation and enemy attrition, whereas Elsenborn Ridge saw over 5,000 American and 10,000 German casualties across several days. Houssen's Death Ditch saw a single-phase reversal with fewer than 90 American casualties and at least 150 Germans neutralized, alongside the destruction of 6 Tiger tanks. Both actions proved critical in their theaters, but Houssen's decisive moment occurred within a 4-hour window, with a lower troop commitment and a higher kill-to-loss ratio. Post-action reviews confirm that, minute for minute, the engagement exhibited one of the highest ratios of enemy armor and personnel lost per American soldier engaged across the Western Front in 1945. Modern historiography identifies the Death Ditch stand as chronically underrated in American popular consciousness when compared to larger, more publicized battles such as Bastogne or Remagen. While the 7th Infantry Regiment received campaign honors and Conner's actions were eventually acknowledged with the Medal of Honor in 2018, few operational analyses have fully recognized the macro-strategic value of halting a 600-man assault with artillery called on one's own position. Recent scholarship in journals such as the Journal of Military History and the United States Army Center of Military History's publications stresses that the action's effect on the timetable for collapsing the Colmar pocket was decisive and is deserving of more prominent place in the narrative arc of the Western European campaign. The fate of the men and units involved reflects the broader transitions of the closing months of World War II. The 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment remained in continuous combat operations through the liberation of the Colmar pocket and subsequent advances into Germany and Austria. The 7th Infantry Regiment was among the longest-serving American regiments in active operations until final orders for demobilization were issued on November 3, 1945. German regiments engaged near Houssen, including elements of the 708th Volksgrenadier Division, were formally disbanded upon surrendering or were liquidated when the French First Army entered Freiburg. Many survivors from both sides were processed through U.S. and French prisoner of war camps at Strasbourg and Metz until 1947. The battlefield at Houssen today is marked by a granite monument dedicated in 1995 to the cotton balers, as well as interpretive panels along the Rue du Canal. The La Tour French National Cemetery, along with the Epinal American Cemetery, records over 2,800 American and nearly 4,000 French graves from the Alsace campaigns. The site of the death ditch itself is catalogued by the American Battle Monuments Commission, which periodically conducts preservation efforts and coordinates annual tours for military historians and surviving family members. The physical scars on the land-faint tank tracks, shell craters, are visible from aerial survey routes over the old Houssen-La Bouche trench network. From a strictly military perspective, the cost in lives and resources was high, but the resulting operational gain was greater. Destroying 6 Tiger tanks and routing a battalion-level assault in winter conditions bought critical time and saved the 3rd Battalion from destruction. The action at Houssen is a study in disproportionate impact, outnumbered and outgunned, but achieving a force multiplier through determination and the judicious use of artillery. Today, the name Houssen is entered into regimental rolls and war memorials, bearing silent witness to the enduring calculus of sacrifice and tactical brilliance. What does the story of 600 Germans, 6 Tigers, final stand in the death ditch reveal about the decisions that shape history? The actions of 1st Lieutenant Garlin Murl Conner and the 3rd Battalion echo far beyond a single battlefield, demonstrating how determination and sacrifice can alter the course of war. If this documentary's story has inspired you to learn more or preserve the memory of those who served, we invite you to explore official archives, visit battlefield memorials, or support veterans organizations dedicated to keeping this legacy alive. History endures because we remember.